What happens when we stop simply admiring Jesus and begin arranging our lives around him? In this conversation, I sit down with Aaron White, a man who for over 20 years has lived with his family in Vancouver's downtown east side. A place marked by addiction, homelessness, poverty, grief, and yet somehow the presence of God. Aaron went there thinking he was taking Jesus to the poor, but what he discovered was far more unsettling. Jesus was already there. In this episode, we talk about surrender, community, pain, recovery, discipleship, and what it means to become the kind of people that don't just believe in Jesus, but actually follow him. This is not a conversation about comfortable Christianity. This is about learning to see Christ in the places we might rather avoid, and asking one honest question. What if we actually took Jesus seriously? Welcome to the Practice Podcast, and we're back. And I'm really delighted because we've got someone really special today, Aaron White. And one of the questions I found myself asking over the past few years is, what happens when we actually take Jesus seriously? Not just to admire him, not just to agree with him, but to begin to arrange our lives around him and what he says. And that's kind of where we're going in this podcast today, because I know that that's something that I believe Aaron has taken very seriously in terms of the life that he lives and that he talks about. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So first of all, welcome, Aaron. It's good to have you. And why don't you tell us where you are in the world today to start with? That might be a good way to start.
Thank you for welcoming me, Dave. I am in Vancouver, which is one of the host cities of the World Cup that's kicking off today. And I have mixed feelings about that. But, we're all, I guess, sort of excited about that we're on the west coast of Canada. And I'm in a neighborhood called the Downtown East Side, which is, Vancouver is a jewel. It's an absolutely gorgeous city. And people who are actually coming and visiting for the World Cup are going, whoa, like it's surrounded by mountains and oceans. It's gorgeous city. But there is one neighborhood that has been socially created, socially engineered to essentially contain what is, the largest intravenous drug use and HIV/AIDS outbreak for many, many years, and so on and so forth, homelessness and prostitution and all kinds of things. That's all my neighborhood. So there's a sort of 10 by 10 square block neighborhood. That's where we've lived for the last 22 years.
Wow. And Aaron, can you tell us a little bit about your story and how God has led you to where you are today? How have you ended up, if you like, where you are? And where you live and what you've just described, it sounds like that was a choice to be there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a combination, I think, of circumstance and environment, family, things that you don't have any decision over, and then things that you do have decisions over. So I was raised in the Salvation Army. That was where my parents went to church and where my grandmother had gone to church. And that's kind of about as far back as it went. But I grew up in that. But it wasn't the Salvation Army. I don't know what people think of the Salvation Army, but it wasn't kind of what I think the popular image of it was. It was kind of a relatively regular evangelical holiness church with very little connection in any kind of regular way with poverty or addiction or any of that kind of stuff. So I was largely protected from that. And I use protected not in a positive or negative, just kind of I was. But I heard all the stories. We were reared on the stories of, 1865 and this really radical movement of holiness, not just preachers, but evangelists and workers and people who moved into the hardest places, certainly in England, but then around the world, the poorest places in order to really incarnate and reach people for the gospel, and not just their souls, but their bodies and their communities and their families and the whole nine yards. So I was raised with that, but I didn't see a lot of it until I needed a job at the age of 17. And a friend of mine ran one of the shelters downtown, and he said, "Why don't you come and work here?" And so I started working there from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., 5 nights a week for the whole summer. And it was about 300 guys. There was a shelter, there was a longer term residence, and there were people it was like a halfway house. People had just come out of prison. And it was me and a janitor. And I was in charge for 8 hours a day, 5 nights a week. And that's insane. I couldn't yet grow a beard. I have since grown a beard. I couldn't at that point grow a beard. And the very first shift, somebody threatened my life. And some of the guys from the shelter started gathering around me and befriended me. And it didn't take very long before I realized, oh, these folk are human. And that's a strange revelation to have to come to. But I did have to come to that they were humans. They were friends. I started inviting them to church. You weren't really supposed to do that, but I invited them to church. They joined the baseball team. And I still know some of them today, more than 30 years later. And the next year I worked in the prison system, same kind of thing, where I started visiting people in the prisons and in the courtrooms and getting to see them as human. And then kind of carried on my life. I lived in the UK for a year and did training in missions and things like that. But it really was when we joined a new Salvation Army initiative in Toronto called 614 to move into the neighborhood. It was one of the poorer neighborhoods and more gang-ridden neighborhoods in Toronto. And so people moved in and we started just doing ministry there. Incarnational ministry was a new word for me and a new idea. And suddenly things really clicked. And that's when we said, well, a new one of those was starting in Vancouver and my old stomping ground. So I said, well, why don't we go back and take everything we've learned? So my wife and our children, we all moved into the downtown east side and have stayed. And we came in with the idea that we were going to come and bring Jesus to the poor. We discovered that the poor already knew Jesus. Jesus was already present. That's quite disturbing for missionary, because now what are you going to do? And then we realized, oh, this is actually a fantastic place to meet Jesus and to learn how to follow Jesus and to share Jesus in a mutual way with the people who are here.
When you started working, like before you grew a beard, as you say, what was it that made you come back? Because, for first day work experience, for some people, that would have been enough, especially at that age, that would have been enough to say, I'm definitely not going back there again. Mm-hmm. But what was it that made you come back?
Yeah.
Question number one. And question number two, was it a hard sell for you and your wife and your family to move into that neighborhood?
Two great questions, because the very first day I wrote down, I did some math of how many more hours do I have to be here? Because it was scary. It was terrifying, really, really scary. But what made me come back was the fact that, yeah, there was a scary guy, but there was also a lot of people who just, they came and they hung out around me, and they were my friends. They were my protectors. So I realized pretty early, okay, this is not, it's not just all scary. There actually is a lot of good here. And that's quite important, because sometimes I think from the outside, we can romanticize the poor and idealize from a particular perspective. And that's actually not true, because people are human and they're messy, and there's all kinds of nonsense that happens in my neighborhood all the time that I don't like. But there's also beauty. So I came back for the friendship. I came back because I saw that there was beauty there as well. And I kept coming back for that. In terms of the move for our family, it's interesting because we were kind of at a crossroads. We were in Ontario and going, well, what's the next step here? And I had some options of what we were going to do. And we had 2 children already. And my wife came to me in one of those glorious moments of marriage and said, we're expecting a third. And we both knew. It was like a sign. We both knew immediately we are to move to the downtown east side, where one of the ideas, one of the founding principles of this new community was God sets the lonely in families. And so if there's no families that are willing to move in, how is that going to work? And we've just tried to hold on to that. We've raised our kids here. Now they're all young adults. And I have a granddaughter, which is the most exciting thing in the world. But just 2 nights ago, we had a family dinner where my mother came and my daughter and my granddaughter were there, and people around the house, and my son and some new folk who had moved into our home. We live in a community home, and they've only been there for about a week. And they just were sitting there eating, and this one person just said, this is the first family meal I've had in 15 years. And, it was just quiet. I just said, well, I'm honored that we get to be part of it. And I said that's the fruit of being here for a long time and of going, this is not difficult. This is not a decision. Should we have a family meal and invite people? Like that's just what one does with one's neighbors if one loves one's neighbors, if one wants to extend the notion of family. So that wasn't a hard decision, but it just shows that that's the fruit that can come of that.
And you mentioned just then that you live in a community home. Can you describe what that means, please?
So for the last coming on 14 years now, we've lived in a very big old house. Now, I know in the UK, this is not a very old house, but for Vancouver, this is a 120-year-old house, and it has 10 bedrooms. We got it miraculously and have been holding on to it a bit like grim death, and it's always under threat, and currently is. It's very difficult to maintain it and to keep paying for it. But we've lived here and we've had as many as 23 people living in the home together, families, children, people who are connected in various ways to us. And it's been under constant renovation, and we do nightly meals. Usually COVID kind of knocked that off of its post a little bit, but we've just tried to live together. And there's been a wide variety of people who've come in and been here for a season and then gone out and done other things. But we've tried to maintain this sense of we live together and we share the things that we have together, and we consistently fail at doing that well. But we are known to be people who pray and people who try to be good neighbors. And just to the left of us is essentially a functioning brothel, and the girls there, they know us, and they know if they're in danger, they can come to our door. When I first moved into this this particular house, the girls would ask me a lot if I wanted a date, which is means do I want to buy them for 30 minutes or whatever. And I said, no, I don't. And now if there's a new girl, some of the other girls come and say, don't ask him. He's our neighbor. You don't have to, he's a good Christian man. Don't ask him. So they protect my virtue in that sense. But yeah, we try and live communally, fail at it consistently, but try and be good neighbors.
And how has that worked? You mentioned that you when you moved into the neighborhood, you had 2 children, one was on the way. And like moving into a community home or a community house like that, what has the impact been on your children being in that environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think both good and bad in some ways, like any kind of upbringing. Again, I don't romanticize it. They've gone through hard stuff. Sometimes people leaving is really hard for them because they don't fully understand why someone might be leaving, and they've grown really attached to people or to the kids who are part of those families. But they have also learned a way. I mean, it's almost, they don't have to think about it anymore. They've learned a way of trying to be with one another and trying to live in an alternative kind of way. And that's inside the home, but also outside the home. So in our neighborhood, every day when I go out, you'll find someone who you're not sure if they're alive or dead. That's just a regular feature of our neighborhood. People are overdosing on fentanyl and other opioids. And so my children have had to learn from the time that they were allowed to walk through the neighborhood, especially on their own, that if you are not sure if someone's alive or dead, you have to check. That's a basic level of what it means to be a good neighbor. That's true in every neighborhood. If you're not sure if someone's alive or dead, you should check. But in our neighborhood, it happens every day. And so they've learned that process. And that's now not a thing where, again, they have to think, should I do that? Or how do I do that? It's, well, I'm going to do that and it's going to take me this amount of time and I have to figure that out and let people know. And they'll often come home and say, yeah, I had to check and make sure someone was alive and they were alive today or whatever. So they have been formed in that way. And that's a long formation into what it means to be a good, I think, Christ-like neighbor.
And what about the not so pleasant times that you've had, I imagine, raising children in that environment? Because I think there's a risk that, and all of this is wonderful and it's beautiful and it speaks of the kingdom. But there is a risk, I think, that sometimes if we don't share some of the negative aspects of that we create or paint the wrong picture of what it actually means to do that. And so are there any stories that you can share that perhaps lean into that? I'm sure there are.
Oh, there's tons. And I'd be careful, not to throw any of my kids under the bus around that. But they've had parents of their friends who said they can't come and visit. They can't go over to that house, because of where we are, because of our neighborhood. Like I said, we've had our kids have been hurt, I think, when some people have left. So some people have left well, some people have left not well from this community home. And the kids have, because they've grown, they don't know the ins and outs. And so they've been quite hurt by that. I think they've been sometimes, especially when they were the only kids in the house, they were a bit of subject to people who didn't understand what it was like having kids and were kind of like, oh, they make a lot of noise. I'm like, well, yeah, that's kind of what happens. And then you have to really, when you're living in a community, you have to negotiate and compromise and figure out who's allowed to say what to what kid and who's allowed to discipline in what ways and who do I have to listen to. All that kind of stuff is really quite tricky. So there's been a lot of that. We've had a couple people die right in front of our house, and that's hard. And when
were they a part of the community as well?
No, they just, well, we have had two people who lived with us died tragically, not while they were living in the house, but just across the street. And that was really hard. And we actually then welcomed in one of their daughter and brought her in. And we essentially think of her as a daughter. That was extremely hard. And my daughter was with her when they got the news that her mother had passed away. And so it was, just they are well experienced with tragedy and with, the work that we do and the risks that we take. I've said this before. I'm not afraid of almost anything in my neighborhood. Any conflict, anything going on, I'm not afraid. I'm happy to be involved. I don't care who you are. I will talk with you. It's easy. That's not a difficult thing for me. We have not received a ton of pain and sorrow, aside from just regular life pain and sorrow from friends who are dealers or addicts or whatever. We have from the church. And
interesting.
Not the whole church, but parts of the church, and for lots of different reasons, and when you take risks and sometimes you fail really badly in those risks, we found that the people who are our friends who are poor have lots and lots of patience and grace for us because their lives are scandal and our lives are scandal. So they're like, we get it. The church has less patience for that. And so we've been hit hard by various aspects of the church in various ways. And I don't even, I'm saying it carefully because I'm not even seeking to judge those who are doing that. It's just, that's a reality. And we've had to at times share with our kids, hey, this is going on and you may hear these things. And our kids for the most part have said, well, but we know who you are. Like, yeah, but it's hard. That's a really, really hard thing for them to have to deal with as well.
Would you say that it's helped their formation living in that environment? Because we have fostered in the past. We've provided like respite care for foster carers. So we've had different children come and live with us for a period of time. And one of the things that was really apparent for some of our kids is that they would become attached to some of these kids. And then when not only did they leave us after respite care, but they left the home that they were living in. And so there was no contact since then. And there was almost a grieving process that we and our kids had to go through in terms of managing loss. And so I imagine that your kids and you and your wife would have experienced loss in various different ways. And I think that processed well, that can be a healthy thing. But I just wondered what the experience had been for you and your family because I imagine you've experienced a lot of loss in the community that you're in.
We have, and that is just life. We're never going to get through life without loss. Yeah. Any sense that we're going to protect our children from that it's delusional. It's just not true. And I say this a lot, even to guys in recovery and addiction. I say, people talk about faith in escapist ways. And that's actually the opposite of faith. Faith is not, I'm escaping from the pain. Faith is, I have the strength and the presence to look at pain in the face. Addiction, drugs, that's escape. And maybe a necessary escape in some ways, but that is escape. Faith is the opposite of that. And so our kids have had to engage that. So a couple of weeks ago, we did a memorial in the park for a young girl, 26, who used to be part of my youth group, and we'd kind of lost touch for a lot of years. But she was at my kids' school, and they knew her. And we had just reconnected, and she died of an overdose. And so we did a memorial, and my son came, and I said, it's really important that you're here. It's important that you remember. It's important that you mark the life that is gone and that we grieve it well, because none of us are going to escape ungrieved from life. And it's why Jesus says, blessed are those who mourn. It's part of the human life. You will receive comfort, but if we don't mourn, we can't actually be comforted. If we cut that piece of us off, then we also cut off the comfort that comes from it.
It's really fascinating to me hearing you speak like this, because it sounds very much to me, and I'm not trying to use platitudes here at all, but what you're describing sounds very much like a kingdom lifestyle, a kingdom way of living, which is antithetical to the way of the world, obviously. And there's a jarring almost in what you're saying with the reality for a lot of people, I imagine, that would be listening to this, in the sense of, yes, that sounds amazing. but that could never be me, or God hasn't called me to that, or that's not for me. But what I'm hearing you say, the principles in which you're talking are kingdom principles, which apply to everyone who is a follower of Jesus. And I wonder, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, many thoughts on that. Because sometimes when I speak, I recognize it can be things that are pretty normal for me feel pretty radical to people. And I go, oh, I'm not even talking about the radical things. This is just the normal things. But I mean, I was speaking just a couple weeks ago at a church, and we were talking about Acts 2 and Acts 4. So the moment just after the falling of the Holy Spirit at Pentecost, and there's this description of the new community of the believers. And it says they were all gathered together and they held all things in common. Nobody believed that anything that they owned was actually theirs, but it all belonged to God, and they shared with anyone who had need. I said, that's just a description of how they were. Does that still apply? And there was just this kind of terror. It was almost comical. I said, well, what would that look like today? And people said, paying off each other's mortgages, but almost like we couldn't even imagine it. And usually people go, well, do you just want us to all move to your neighborhood? And I go, no, we have a housing crunch. We don't need you all here. But if you actually engage in the kingdom lifestyle of the church where you are, that's going to affect us in positive ways. That's going to affect the world. So I think of the Truckmes, Andre and Magda Truckme. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they were pastors in France during the Second World War, but they had been pastors there beforehand, a small little community of 5,000 people. And they just discipled this community for years. They prepared them. And so when the stuff broke out that did, and Jewish people were fleeing the Nazi government, but also the Vichy government in France, they came to this little town, and the town was ready. They had been discipled. They were prepared. They knew what to do, all of them. And they saved roughly, they assume something like 3,000 to 5,000 Jewish lives in this tiny little town, because they had been discipled unto action. So when I was talking to this church, I said, well, we can't even imagine that life because we haven't been prepared for it. You're not ready for it. You're not ready to suddenly walk in to this thing. Now, obviously, we need the Spirit. That's the only way this works. But you also need to be prepared. We have to be discipled unto this because it's a hard thing to do. And so this village was discipled to be ready to really love their neighbors when their neighbors were about to be killed. And that took time and took effort and took intentionality. And most of us are not really ready for it.
Yeah. So the whole purpose of the practice is to help people in their discipleship, to help them become more like Jesus, but to live more like Jesus in their everyday lives. And I actually think that, very similar to what you've said, that if we live that way, then we will impact change in our communities. We then become the light in dark places because we look different, we talk different, we behave different. Everything is different when we live from a life that is discipled by Jesus. So that's what the podcast is about. And that's part of the reason why I invited you. But also what I'm hearing is underneath all of that, there has to be a heart posture of surrender. There has to be a heart posture of your will be done, Lord, not mine. And wherever you go, I will go. Whatever you tell me to do, I will do. Not my will, but yours. And I think that that's, for a lot of people, perhaps even people watching or listening, is the battle. That is the internal fight, because it's not because people don't want to do it. Of course, we love Jesus and we want to, but there is an internal grappling that's like every time we move forward into it, there's something pulling us back. I wondered if you've experienced that in your discipleship early doors, and what did it look like for you to push through if you did?
Yeah.
In that circumstance?
Well, today I experience it. You're never done with that. That wherever you are at, you're going to face that next layer of the onion to pull back. So I'll talk about myself, but I want to talk first actually about Mary, because Mary, I think, is our model for discipleship. I love Mary, and us Protestants have become so anxious about Mary as some kind of Catholic boogie woman who's going to jump out from behind a bush and hit us with a rosary and I'm like, she's amazing. And there's a reason why she's honored. It's as a young girl, what's her line, right? Like she's invited into this. The first person to receive Jesus into her life is Mary, quite literally. And it changes everything, socially, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, physically. And for the rest of her life, she never stops being Jesus's mother. And her role, as she's invited in, she goes, let it be unto me as you have said. But do you think that there weren't, like when she went and presented Jesus at the temple and the prophet goes, well, a sword's going to pierce your soul. You don't think she had she says she contemplated this. Well, I bet she did. I bet she did. And then there's moments where she goes, hey, Jesus, what are you doing? Get out of there, come back home. And he's like, well, no, that I need to be about my Father's business, So it isn't that ever ends. None of us are perfect in that. So I still have today, whatever Jesus is calling us to. Like I think of when he goes to resurrect Lazarus and he meets, Martha and Mary, and they're basically calling him out, said, if you had been here, you would have saved Lazarus's life. And he goes, okay, that's a pretty big step of belief that you think I could have done that. Do you think I could do it now? And they go, well, at the end of all things, you're going to do it. And he's like, that's another step of belief. Okay, that's pretty incredible that you believe that. But what about now? How about you roll away the stone? Well, but there's going to be a smell. Like it's that, what's the next step towards? So absolutely in every step. And part of it is having a community around you where if you lack the faith, and I think this is key to discipleship, that it's not just a personal matter. Discipleship is a communal matter. Discipleship happens in community, but also communities are discipled. And so there are times, and there's been many times when I have simply lacked the faith to move forward, to hold on, to keep going. And when I say that, I mean like yesterday. And I don't mean that actually in a comical way. I mean that in a very genuine, or maybe 2 days ago, I wrote a thing saying, I think I'm done. And there are people around me who will go, actually, you might be done in this moment, but we're not done. So right now you can't walk, but we'll carry you. And so there's been multiple times when I thought, no, I can't do this, or this is too far, or God, just get us out of here. And it has felt like jumping from kind of shifting rock to shifting rock to shifting rock. And sometimes it'd be nice to just stand on some solid ground. But God continues to invite us deeper. Another danger, though, when you do it, and when you even get known for doing it, is people will put you on a pedestal going, wow, look at that. That's the most dangerous thing in the world. They say that the easiest way to kill a monk is to compliment him. Like, don't do that. Like who are the people who are calling you even deeper? And I have some of those people in my life who will keep me accountable, but also call me deeper. Like, oh, you think you're doing the thing, but Jesus has called you even deeper. He's inviting you, and it's for your good. It's not to break you. It's for your good. But it never ends. So Father Hopko, he's an Orthodox priest. He wrote 55 maxims, and one of my favorites is always just expect that you will be tempted until your very dying breath. It doesn't end. Sorry.
No, don't apologize. Please don't apologize. How then, someone watching this, how would you encourage them to take that step? Mm-hmm. Because again, I mean, this stuff excites me, as you can tell, and as you know, this is what gets me up in the morning. I work with ex-offenders. I work with the street homeless. I work with people men and women in recovery, and I run discipleship programs as well. And in fact, I was there on yesterday, and I said to some of the guys there, I said to them, when you guys live this stuff out, it makes me feel like a millionaire without the cash. It makes me feel like you get it, you've got it, and you're running with it. And you couldn't pay me enough to see that, because these are people that were literally at death's door. And when they grab the principles of the teachings of Jesus and apply them to their lives, and their eyes begin to open, you cannot pay me enough for that. But I'm also aware that for some people that is miles beyond their threshold of comfort. So how do we help people take one step of faith in that direction? And the reason why I asked the question is because I think that, especially within Western circles in particular, that we sometimes do like give money to the poor, or we'll do like a suit run, and we'll go out on the streets and we'll do something like that on a Friday night, and we'll come back and we'll punch the air and we'll say, yes, we did something great. Yeah. And they did.
Sure. Maybe.
To be fair.
Yeah.
Maybe. But the fact that they even went out there, for some people, that's a big step. And so
for the heart.
There is something in that. But there's more, there's deeper depths, there's deeper water to tread into. And unless we invite people into the deeper water, they will only just dip their toe and think that that's enough. I'm so sorry to interrupt this conversation. I just wondered very quickly, would you mind just buying me a coffee? That's how much it costs. It's actually less than a coffee to become a practitioner in the Practice Plus. And that's where this episode is heading. We're about to finish this episode, but you can pick up the second part in the Practice Plus. And in the Practice Plus, there's so much that you get in there as well. We're doing a coffee with Dave, where we have like a Zoom or a meeting with every practitioner where you can ask questions and just talk about anything related to discipleship, what you're experiencing, some of the challenges. And I don't claim to have all the answers, but we can thrash it out together. That's all in the Practice Plus. So if you would be so kind to buy me a coffee, head over to the Practice Plus as soon as this episode finishes and join us there.
So it's interesting. You've said a couple things, including just what you just said there, that so we created a discipleship resource called The Creative Way Down, very specifically for churches to encounter it. So we say that the opening line is, what if we took the words of Jesus seriously, or the invitation of Jesus seriously? What if we actually did? And it's a 3-month, every single day, can be curated and hosted if you want, but you can also be self-guided in community, going into the Beatitudes and into the 12-step recovery stuff. Because for exactly the reason you just shared, which was, and the central metaphor is come into the water. So you start on the beach, you put your toes in, and then you start going deeper and deeper and deeper until you're underwater. But most of us aren't even on the beach because we just don't want to, we're not asking those questions. Whereas the folk that you're just talking about, it is somehow, Dave, so much easier for somebody who has realized their life has fallen apart to go, well, what if I grabbed hold of this thing? And the number of guys, I mean, most of my most successful people doing discipleship are in that category, met them in jail, or they met the Lord in jail or whatever, because they've realized, I need to change. I've said to guys in recovery, you are so blessed to be here. They go, what are you talking about? This is awful. I'm like, no, you're doing something that literally everybody needs to do, but you recognized 100%. It. Because nobody using crystal meth is thinking, this is all right. But a ton of people who are addicted to all kinds of other things that our society approves of think they're doing just fine, and they'll never get to step one. So we talk about the first month is just surrender. We just go through the first 3 Beatitudes and go, this is about surrender. You cannot get to hungering and thirsting for righteousness or justice until you have learned what it means to be poor in spirit, to mourn, to be meek, and to receive the attendant blessings, because that's the invitation into the life of Jesus. That's what he's inviting you into, but it starts, the first step of the ladder is like the first stage of recovery. You can't jump to step 6. You got to start step 1, which is my life is unmanageable. Because that's true. Yes. So you have to get there first. And most of us have created a life, a culture, but also a church culture filled with false comfort, a systematized false comfort that convinces us that we're doing okay, but it actually prevents us from reaching the spiritual nourishment that we require, the spiritual challenge that we require. So what I often say, what's the first step? Well, I mean, it is surrender. But I say, if you want to begin, you're probably not ready to move to the downtown east side or to engage in any kind of that ministry that isn't just transactional. So you got to practice. And so we say, I say you can't change your church, at least not now. You can't change your church, but you can change your table. So you can start saying, what if I invited a friend over and we decided what we wanted to eat and we bought the groceries together with our money together and we cooked together, we sat down and we ate together. What if we just started there and got a little bit good at doing that? I mean, that's how far back we have to go. And I think in our Western culture, typically is what if I ate with somebody? But we have to take these steps back. So then you're surrendering. I'm surrendering my privilege to just eat whatever I want on my own with my own money and not worry about anybody else. Actually now, so we have a couple of vegetarians in the house. Okay. So if I cook, that means I got to at least cook something that they can eat. Well, I have to surrender something. And it's these little small steps, these little small practices that actually get us there. And they're small practices of love. How do I love that person? How do I serve that person well? In so doing, I am joining Jesus and Jesus' love for that person. There's these tiny little steps that will eventually get us there because most of us are not ready to do the bigger steps.
Absolutely.